recording and we'll get this class underway.
Okay.
Okay. So the structure will be as you're familiar with. We have discussions in this particular class because there is so much information. There are 2 discussions each week.
Okay.
And we'll have an in-class exercise, which we'll do later tonight. And basically, it'll be some practice based on what we've been doing in the lecture. Okay, to get you prepared for the assignment. And the assignment structure, I'll just pull this up, I'll go down to the prompt because the other material there is useful, but it's a worksheet. I don't know if you've had the classes where you fill out a worksheet and then essentially take a quiz to answer those questions. Basically, this is a study quiz. The worksheet allows you to do the calculations and thinking about the problem sort of offline.
Okay.
And then you take those answers and they will ask you the same questions in the quiz, so you can simply put them in.
Oh, okay.
It's sort of a backwards way of me grading homework, right? But it works pretty well because you can do it at your pace. If you get caught in something, you can go back and look at some of the other resources that are available in the class. And if you get tired of doing that, because there's like 25 or 30 questions in each of those. If you get tired of doing that, you can take a break and then just come back and fill it in one session. So there will be one of those each week. The class itself will include in the last week some basic accounting principles. Because one of the things that medical assistants sometimes end up doing is managing the front desk, which means that they need to understand some of the needs and the reasons that we do accounting the way we do. It's not an accounting class.
Okay.
Okay. Those are, we don't have you doing that in this program. But one thing that I wanted to say up front, let's go to the home page right now. This course uses EHR Go. Have you used that in some of your other classes?
I have, yes.
Great. So you have an EHR Go account.
Yes.
So in the last week, you'll actually be using that to pull records and essentially talk about how you would deal with customers who are asking about their bill.
Oh, okay.
Okay, which is something you may experience working in a clinic. Somebody is going to come in and say, well, why was I charged for this? Well, you have to be able to show that it was reasonable and be able to give a reasonable explanation. Because people get funny about money.
Oh, yeah.
So, and the last thing is an assessment, as usual. The assessment will be, I don't remember exactly how many questions, but I view assessments as more of a chance to learn. And so what I do is I give you no time limit and I allow 3 tries for each assessment. Now, the way the assessments are structured, each of those 3 tries will have different questions. Not all questions will be different, but there will be different questions because what it does is randomly draw from a question bank.
Okay.
So you'll see some overlap, but you'll also see, and you'll see very similar questions, but you'll just see different ones. So it's a chance to look at what you're doing and really maximize your score. But also, I really like to see people do this 3 times because then they practice. And what math is practice, practice, practice. Right? Okay. Now you can see this on your screen, but you can't see it in your shell. which is each week I will be using some of my own outside resources, and those that I will upload for you to make use of each week.
Okay. Perfect.
Also, I'll put the Zoom recordings into each week as well, into a page for that. So
Okay.
um, at the end of this class, and actually at the end of the first class of any week, you'll see these 2 pages appear in the shell for each week.
Perfect.
So yeah, my idea is that I don't want to hide anything or keep anything back from you that you might need.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that.
Well, you're here to learn, and I'm here to help you do that. Um, as usual, this is you're experienced with these Zoom classes now, I know. Um, so it's a little different than a true online class in that we will actually meet for 3 hours or so each time we have a class period. Some of that time, I can't talk for 3 hours. You don't want to listen to me for 3 hours. So we may pull up a few videos to watch, but of course, watching videos is not the greatest thing either. But there will be time that we'll take in the middle of class for you to start working on assignments and discussions,
Okay.
so that you can have a chance. If there are things you don't understand, we can talk about it. And so you shouldn't have a problem with that, I hope. Also, if you have any questions between classes, email me. I do
Okay.
check my email pretty regularly, and I will get back to you as soon as I can.
All right.
Okay? So let's take a look at the discussions first. Oh, and by the way, the discussions, as usual, are due on Wednesday night, except we didn't have class on Monday, so I don't care about getting them in tonight. So don't stay up till midnight working on these,
Well, thank you.
especially when you have a child in the house. So the first one is about the consequences of drug calculation errors and where they arise. There are several links here that are worth reading. Um, I don't quite understand why they put a question about pediatric doses in this week, because that's the subject of next week.
Oh,
But you
okay.
can go ahead and take a look at it. Pediatric patients are not just little people requiring less drug. Pediatric patients they don't handle drugs the same way that we do as we get older, largely because drugs are handled through various body systems that are still developing, and including the liver. And they're just not as capable of handling some of them. So we do reduce those doses, but understand that there are several reasons that pediatric patients get less drug.
Okay.
This article here on the impact of medication errors on patients, et cetera, is something that's worth reading. Drugs are toxins. There is no such thing as a safe drug. All of them have side effects, but not everyone has the same side effects. Some people will have very severe effects because of the way their bodies handle them. Sometimes those can be anything up to anaphylactic reactions to drugs that you'd think were pretty benign. My older daughter had a classmate who was extremely allergic to ibuprofen, to the point where she had to carry an EpiPen.
Oh,
She
wow.
couldn't even touch one with her fingers, and she'd react.
Wow.
That's a pretty extreme reaction.
Yeah.
but it's a drug that most people think of as relatively safe. But the thing about ibuprofen, not only can you have such allergic reactions, but long-term usage of the drug impairs kidneys. Just like
Okay.
long-term usage of Tylenol
Those
will wreck your liver.
liver. Yep.
So all of these things, even the drugs we think of as safe, have problems. You were told when your child was born, don't give this child aspirin,
Yes.
because that's a good example of a drug that's handled differently in pediatric patients than in patients that are older.
Okay.
So, so we really want to impress on everyone that any drug can be toxic to someone, and most of them are toxic at a high dose to everyone.
Okay.
So we want to be careful. Medication errors are really are very, very common in medicine. Probably in the range of 100,000 potential medication errors are written every year by physicians and prescribers. Fortunately, most of them get caught.
Okay. That's
And a lot of it gets caught in the pharmacy. A lot of it gets caught when the physician goes back and looks at it and says, oops. But a lot of times it has to go elsewhere. That's why people really ought to look very carefully at any prescription they receive, and even potentially when they're trying to get it filled by a pharmacist, ask if that's an appropriate dose, or check it out. There are plenty of ways of doing that as well. But always have to be aware that mistakes happen, and they happen for many reasons. Some of them are because the physician doesn't know enough about the medication. Physicians study medications formally in one class in medical school. And in their first year, when they take human pharmacology, that's when they get their greatest exposure to the greatest breadth of drugs. They get a lot more exposure in other classes, but that's the one concentrated class. The rest of it they get on their own. They do continuing education, they read, they study what's new, and they get a lot of information from drug company representatives that come and visit them. But they can't know everything. So occasionally they'll have a medication that instead of writing a prescription, they should look it up. And many of them do. But a lot of times they will think they remember how a drug is used. So the other thing they may not know is the patient. The patient may be allergic. I've been allergic to penicillin and sulfas all my life that I know of, and
same here.
I've had doctors try to prescribe them to me,
Hmm.
even though my intake forms all said allergic to. Right? I've had them try to do that.
I actually had my mom said I had an allergic reaction as a child, and ever since then, I was told to state that I'm allergic to penicillin and sulfa products. And when I had a really bad kidney infection and they were prescribing me stuff, the doctor prescribed me something with a form of psyllin, so a penicillin form of something in there, and I broke out into hives.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's really scary.
It is. It is scary. It's not a pleasant reaction. And of course, you don't want to be prescribed something that could end up causing you to get even more allergic, because those allergic reactions increase over time, usually. So, but a lot of it is not knowing the other drugs the patient is on, because also, as I don't know how many other pharmacology classes you've taken. You said you took 200.
Hmm.
Did
Oh,
you take 208, 209?
oh yeah.
Okay, so
Yep.
you know that all drugs can have interactions with other drugs and with foods.
Yes.
So the physician really needs to know what other drugs the patient is taking, which means they need to be looking at the patient chart. And the patient needs to know what drugs the patient is taking because the patient has a role in this as well, which is to be informed about what their medical needs are, but also about what they're actually taking. And you'll talk to people sometimes and say, what medications are you taking? Well, I take a green one and a pink one and you know, those are useless. They need to know what they are, which is why we advise people always to carry a list of their medications if they take any. So then they can just hand it to whoever or write it out. But a lot of it's that. Sometimes the types of errors are based on things like what are reasonable doses, what about the route of administration. So each medication needs to be checked. And today with the online systems, that's easy to do. But you need to be able to understand how to take a drug. one of the things that I have, an old joke about, somebody who's supposed to give a patient a drug, they're supposed to give them an injectable drug, and they're staring at the capsule, wondering how they're going to inject it into the patient. That's a joke, but it is, like many jokes, it's not necessarily 100% funny or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to know how the drugs are to be given. Sometimes it's just based on not paying attention.
Okay.
It is based on and in a pharmacy, this is something that does happen occasionally. Drugs are arranged on the shelf in alphabetical order, so you go up there to get a drug of some sort, and you pick up the bottle next to it because it has a similar name, or you just grab a bottle with the right first initial. That's why we always, double and triple check
Yes.
when we're doing this. Excuse me. The one that my sort of go-to horror story on that occurred in Florida about 20 years ago. A child was brought into the emergency room and was in really bad shape. The immediate reaction from the medical people was, of course, the child is being abused. Well, the child wasn't being abused. Actually, no, the child died. And so that was the first thought, was child abuse, which is unfortunately altogether too common.
Yes.
But and there was no evidence from neighbors or from anything anyone knew about the family that this child would have been abused by his parents. So the medical examiner got really interested in the case. What's going on here? And she decided to send off a tissue sample for toxicological evaluation. It came back with lethal levels of methadone. Well, then the child abuse people called on the parents again because, of course, where did he get the methadone?
Yeah.
So there again, you've got child abuse. Well, and again, there was no evidence in the house of any sort of opiates or any opiate-related drugs. So they started backtracking, and the child was taking Ritalin, had been prescribed Ritalin for ADHD, and the pharmacist had decided to try and help the parents because Ritalin was expensive. So he decided to help the parents by giving them the generic form, which is called methylphenidate.
Okay.
And he grabbed the wrong bottle off the shelf, and he gave the child methadone,
Oh
and
no.
the calculated dose that assuming methylphenidate turned out to be lethal for this kid. So the pharmacist really, really screwed up. He lost his license. But of course, the parents had lost their child. So
Okay.
that's really the kind of error that should never occur. Why the
Right.
pharmacy, why the pharmacist would have something of a controlled substance like methadone. And well, methadone and methylphenidate are both controlled. They're both Schedule II products. So they were probably in the same, Schedule II locked cabinet. He just grabbed the wrong bottle.
One bottle.
So that is an action-based mistake. Another could be, basically not counting out the right dose. So there's two problems with the wrong dose. One is if it's too low, the patient is not going to recover from whatever it is, and that's going to lead the physician to assume that the drug wasn't working.
And probably prescribe them something
else, maybe
else,
or maybe a higher dose.
and that could,
Yep.
that could cause severe issues.
Good. And then, of course, the other kind of error is overdosing, which is more likely to lead you into a toxicity situation. So there are lots of ways these things can happen. They're, in all cases, they're preventable.
Yes.
We say this is an accident. Well, by definition, accidents are preventable. And in the case of drugs, since the side effects of a mistake can be so severe, there is the only acceptable result is the correct result. It's not like, a high school algebra class where you do the problem right, get the wrong answer, and get partial credit. That doesn't happen in medicine.
Right.
If the patient dies, you don't get partial credit for doing everything else right. So anyway, the prompt is to actually discuss some of that, the pitfalls of improper calculations, et cetera. And you'll see some questions in other places about that. But these resources, many of them here are really worth reviewing because the information in them is very good. I've already done an initial post. So since there is just you in the class, it's going to be hard to have you do responses to other students since there aren't any. So what I suggest is you read my post, respond to that, tell me what you think.
Okay.
Go ahead and do your post. I will be responding to what you write. And then if you feel that there is, I may ask you for more information, et cetera, so we can carry on a short dialogue that way.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Yeah. So the next is discussion number 2, which is units of measure. Now you probably remember a lot of this from Pharmacy 200, and you probably saw smatterings of it in other classes. But we have 3 systems that are used in medicine. The major system is the metric system, also known as the international system or Système International. We know it as the metric system. The metric system is the official measurement system of the United States government. But in practical terms, It's used mainly for medical and scientific purposes. Most people don't use it because they don't need to. You buy gas in gallons, not liters. You go to the store and you buy a quart of, olive oil, not a liter. Actually, you probably buy liters these days because of international trade, but we never used to do that. We measure things in cups, not milliliters. So, but we do have to use the what we call the household system, which basically is things that you have the ability to deal with in the home. It's related to the English system in that we use, teaspoons and tablespoons, etc. But our measurement system here that we use is when we do our drug calculations, all of our calculations are in the metric system. You may remember that. We
Yes.
calculate a number of drugs are dosed in a number of milligrams, or less often grams or micrograms. And if it's a liquid drug, it's dosed in milliliters. And a liter being approximately a quart, a milliliter is 1/1000th of that.
Okay.
So we look at this system, and then we go and we look at our patients. And our patients probably learned something about the metric system in high school, and probably haven't used it since. So, they don't know a milliliter from a quart. They don't have any idea what that is usually. So usually what happens is we will, when we're giving our patients liquid drugs that they take by mouth, that they take orally.
Okay.
There are only a few things that patients inject themselves with, and they're trained properly to use the equipment. But we will we will calculate a dose, and then our instructions to the patient, that thing you see on the prescription label that tells you how to take the drug. And we'll talk about, a common example, and you've probably already seen it, is amoxicillin. I don't know if your son is allergic to the cillins or not, but he has to take mostly liquid drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do is we will convert the dose, we calculate a dose in milliliters and convert that to teaspoons using the conversion of 5 milliliters per teaspoonful.
Okay.
Okay. Other than that, the only other place we use the household system is actually a very important place because many drugs are dosed based on the weight of the patient. They're usually potent drugs, and we want to have very accurate dosing. I mean, ideally, every drug would be calculated and dosed based on the weight of the patient rather than being given a pill. But that's not the way medicine is working at the moment. So there are drugs that we do have to dose in terms of so many milligrams or even micrograms per kilogram of body weight. But most of our patients are weighed in pounds. So we have to convert pounds to kilograms. And you probably do remember this from Chantel's class, is that there are 2.2 pounds per kilogram.
Yes.
So you simply divide the weight in pounds by 2.2 and you have kilograms.
Okay.
And yeah, obviously using a calculator is essential there to make it right. But that's how we want to do that. So, until we actually move to all metric in this country, that's the way we'll be doing it. So we have that. So our drugs that we use, our chosen system is the metric system. The household system is used only limitedly and usually only when we are telling patients how much drug to take per dose when they're taking their drugs at home.
Okay.
Other than that, it's the metric system, and we'll look at conversion. We'll quickly review conversions there as well. Finally, we have something called the apothecary system. Apothecary system has been around basically since ancient Greece in one form or another, but it really was fully developed during the Middle Ages and used its own systems of measurement. Where the metric measurement system uses as the base unit of mass or weight the gram, the apothecary system uses something called a grain. And a grain was defined from early on in the history of medicine as the weight of a grain of wheat. Now, of course, it depends on what kind of wheat you're talking about, right? So it's not a real accurate or consistent system. It's all but been banned. A lot of places don't even teach it anymore, but it's all but been banned in most hospitals. It does hang on. If you find a bottle of aspirin on the shelf, the 325 milligram tablets, you're likely to see on the label 325 milligrams or 5 grains.
Okay.
Because that was the standard pharmaceutical measurement system when aspirin was invented in the 1870s.
Oh, wow.
So they were using it then. Even though that it's been supplanted, it has held on. And this measurement system was actually taught in medical schools up until probably the middle, through about the first third of the 20th century for dosing of many drugs. When the other place we see it is on bottles of nitroglycerin tablets that are given to patients who have angina. They're just given a bottle. If you look at the label there, it will say something like 0.4 milligrams, and then it'll say 1/150th of a grain. It's a very potent drug, obviously.
Oh, yes.
So you will see that, although most people don't have a clue what that means. But other places that we will see these measurement systems, and we'll come back to those in a little bit, is we see a volume of a fluid ounce and a dram. A dram is 1/8 of a fluid ounce. Now, a fluid ounce is approximately the same as an ounce in our standard measures. But if you remember, you've probably seen with things like essential oils and things like that, the little short vials with the that are brown glass and have a little screw top lid. That's 1 gram.
Oh, wow.
That'll tell you how small the volume that is.
Wow. Okay.
So, and we still, when in the pharmacy, they still sell pill bottles based on the dram volume. It's just a hangers-on from ancient times. And if you look at a liquid medication bottle, like the bottles that you get from the physicians that have liquid medications for your child, you'll see some funny symbols on the side. You'll see it lined out in milliliters and in fluid ounces with a funny little symbol that looks like a 3 on top of a 3. And that's just an ancient holdover from the old days of the apothecary system. Apothecary is the old word for a pharmacist.
Okay.
And up until the end of the 19th century, that was what all of the pharmacy shops were called, apothecary shops. So that's where that comes in. So the you need really to understand this. You need to be aware that there are these similarities and differences, and you can read those. There are some videos here that, again, I think this one is sort of useful. I think I can find a better metric table elsewhere. This one is sort of out of place because we really don't get into dosage actual calculations until next week. But it's a good review.
Okay.
And again, the prompt is to look at how can you reduce error risk in calculating dosages, because it is so easy to make those mistakes.
Right.
Which is why, you know, we teach people to check, and check. Okay. So again, I've posted some material here that gives a little background and can help you get started on that discussion.
Okay.
Okay. Let's switch over now and take a look at the assignment. If you pull up the assignment, what you find is there's a lot of information in here that's worth looking at. We will get to that information through a slightly different route. If you click and download the worksheet, what you will come up with is, let me see if I can find that. Yes. And actually, I will be posting this version of the assignment sheet because I've made some corrections on it.
Okay.
There's a couple of things on here that aren't right.
Okay.
We can go through, we'll just do a quick review of some of the abbreviations that you've already studied. It's in alphabetical order. It is not complete. There are thousands of these things, as you probably remember. But these are important ones. If you want a patient, if the physician writes AC on a prescription, that means that it's to be taken before meals. If it is critical that it be taken a certain amount of time before meals, that should be specified. Some drugs need to be taken on an empty stomach, and the stomach has to remain empty for at least a half an hour to an hour in order for the drug to be properly absorbed. So if there is no indication of time, then people can take it as long as they can do so comfortably anytime before they eat, but they should eat fairly soon afterwards.
Okay.
This description here, I'm going to look at three of these, AD, AS, AU. A refers to the ear. Think about it as the oral canal, the oral sense, right?
Okay.
D stands for right. Comes from the Latin word dexter, which meant good. Okay.
Okay.
So the AS is for the left ear. The S comes from sinister, which is the Latin word meaning bad. Which is why we place a, sinister as a negative meaning. But what that really meant was the sinister were the bad guys, the people, the lefties, the left-handed fighters, the bad guys, because the Roman centurion was trained to fight with his short sword in his right hand, his shield in his left. Well, when the shield is in your left hand and you're fighting a right-handed opponent, his sword is going to go toward your shield preferentially, and you block it. When they're left-handed, they're going toward your sword arm, and it's harder. You can't block without impeding your ability to use your sword. So they were the bad guys, which is why we have sinister meaning meaning bad people, or a sinister situation,
Wow,
suicide.
that's
And
interesting.
yeah, it is funny how these words evolve. Um, AU means both ears. U means both. You think of it as union or
Okay.
unite. Okay. So of course, BID, cap is a capsule, tab is a tablet. D/C or just DC means to discontinue. Does not mean District of Columbia. It means to discontinue. And you'll see that on medical orders. A doctor will order the discontinuation of a drug because it isn't working. Okay, so you'll see that, or discontinue some other form of therapy that's going on.
Okay.
We down here, we get to D5W, that's 5% dextrose in water. It's written like this a lot of times, but properly the 5 should be a subscript.
Okay.
But nobody worries about that anymore anyway. This one I put a correction on, D5NS. They say dextrose 5% in sodium chloride. No, it's in a very specific form, normal
No
saline,
saline. Okay.
0.9% sodium chloride. So D5NS is along with normal saline and ringers and lactated ringers are very common IV fluids given to patients when they are in an ambulance or in a hospital.
Yep.
To keep them hydrated and nutrition. EC means enteric coated, meaning there's a layer of material on the outside of the dosage form, usually a tablet, and or the long caplets that are basically long tablets, that prevents the drug from being released in the stomach. So it goes through the stomach and ends up releasing in the small bowel, which is where most things are absorbed anyway. ER is one that we probably should avoid because, of course, other people think it means emergency room.
Emergency room.
Right. It means extended release. But what it means is that the drug is released over time. It has special structure, layers often, or whatever, in the formulation that will release drug and then release more later. It's usually for drugs that have a short half-life. You remember what a half-life is. It's the time for half of the drug to be metabolized out of the system. Usually when they're very short half-lives, we have two choices. We can develop some sort of sustained release or extended release tablet or capsule, or we can have them dosing many, many times a day.
Oh, yeah, no.
Yeah, nobody likes that.
No.
The release too many times, too many doses per day reduces compliance. Too many tablets or capsules or dosage forms per dose reduces compliance. So what we try to do is keep things small. If someone has to take multiple tablets or multiple capsules, we usually like to keep that at 2 or less if we can. Sometimes that's not possible. Years ago, my father was told he had to take 1,000 micrograms of vitamin B12 a day. And he could only find 100 microgram tablets. And the pharmacist told him, well, you'll have to take 10 a day. And he called me up and said, do I have to take 10 of these things every morning? And I said, enjoy your breakfast, Dad. He didn't like that. So my brother-in-law found him some 1,000 microgram tablets, but eventually, he did not want to do it. But my dad.
I don't blame him.
Yeah. But my dad is was ex-military, and so he obeyed the doctors. He didn't like it, but he did it. So we have this extended release. The difference, a little confusion that people can have. A G means a gram. A GR means a grain. Too
Okay.
many people will use a GR for gram, and that is not accepted. Okay.
Okay.
Also, there's a difference when we tell a patient, when we write a dose for a patient, we'll say like, 1 gram or 0.5 grams. But if we're talking in grains, we would put the number after the GR.
Okay.
Again, that's one that an awful lot of people don't know, but that's the proper way to use it. One of the reasons we don't like to use grains is it's too easy to confuse it with grams. And since a grain is either 60 or 65 milligrams, you can see that if you were talking about giving 1 grain and people thought it was a gram, you'd be way overdosing. At 65 milligrams, so that's going to be about a 10 to 15-fold overdose. So we don't like that idea.
No.
So the other one to remember, an important one starting with G, is drops, GTT. We use that mostly for ophthalmic and otic, the ear.
Okay.
Drops is.
That makes sense.
Pardon?
That makes sense. Or what about like an eye drop?
Yep.
Okay.
If someone said if a doctor were saying, 2 drops in each eye, he would say 2 GTT OU, O being the eye. Okay.
Okay.
And then he'd give you a number of doses per day. So that's how they would use that.
Okay.
One that is, we use is of course H for hour, or HR. HS means bedtime, hour of sleep. So you'll see an abbreviation HS, that means take it just before you go to bed. There are a lot of drugs that can have varying effects. Obviously, sleep aids you take before you went to bed. But there are other drugs that can cause slight, vertigo or other issues that are best off if you're lying down, if you're asleep. So
yeah, you don't want to operate heavy machinery on those.
no, you don't. You don't. You want to be sleeping. Okay, and of course we have IM and IV. You remember that from Pharmacy 107? You took that class, right?
Yes.
Okay. LA, long acting, is another word for extended release.
Okay.
And in fact, if we go down here, we'll see SR, sustained release. So there are several ways that we can label these drugs for these long release. So down here.
Sustained release. Okay.
Would it help if I did
Oh,
that?
no, I can see just fine. Oh, there we go.
Well, it helps me, so I'm going to do it. Okay, so I'll bring it up here. So a capital L for liter.
Yes.
You remember that we never use a small L for liter.
No.
Too easy to confuse with the number 1. And this is my quibble with this sheet from the school. They tell us M capital L or M small L for
it's never small
milliliter,
L.
and we never use a small L. So let's keep on going. Microgram is 1,000th of a milligram. And a milligram is 1,000th of a gram.
Yep.
So a microgram is 1,000,000th of a gram. We have something called a milliequivalent. You'll see this with drugs like potassium chloride or sodium bicarbonate, minerals and electrolytes. This is an old term that is related to the chemical combining power of these substances.
Okay.
It's important that you understand that these are a dosing unit, but you treat them just as though they're milligrams or micrograms or anything else, because the doctor will say, if you look at like a potassium chloride tablet, it will say something like 5 milliequivalents or 10 milliequivalents. And so basically, it's just a measure of potency, just like grams, milligrams, and micrograms.
Okay.
And so we have that as well. We'll see various things like NEB for nebulizer. Some drugs are delivered through that mechanism, warmed water, and the drug is delivered in that way. A nasogastric tube, you probably know something about that.
Yeah.
It is a way of putting liquids into the stomach. Sometimes we use it for enteric feeding, and sometimes we use it if patients can't swallow drugs. We can actually crush up tablets or open capsules and mix them with water and have them go in through a nasogastric tube. Apparently, they're not very comfortable. I fortunately have no experience with them.
Same here.
But that's apparent. NS normal saline, we talked about that. Here's the D, S, and U again, this case for the I. Think of O as ophthalmic.
Okay.
Ounce, that is an apothecary or household measure. P is after.
After. Okay.
It can be a small p as well. And it can have a line over it.
Okay.
Okay, line over it. It stands for post, meaning a Latin word meaning after.
Okay.
EC is after meals, not after means. After meals. And that stands for post kibos. Kibos means to chew or to eat. And of course, we've got PO
By
for
mouth
orally,
or
and PRN for as needed. And usually it will tell you what you need it for. Where you'll see this a lot of times is for prescriptions of opiates.
Yes.
And it'll say, take every 4 to 6 hours as needed for pain. So that people understand that they only take it when they need it. If they don't have the symptom, they don't take it. Okay.
You hope anyway.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, that's the problem. That's why we put so many controls on those things. Q and then a number H is every so many hours. Q2H, 6H, 8H, whatever.
Okay.
It's an alternate to the, QD, QID, TID, BID sequence, but it is more specific as to when the drug is taken. And in fact, these are used in all hospital situations where a patient is receiving drugs. They will receive them at standard times. So a physician may write TID and it'll get translated into the hospital system as every 8 hours. And it will be and usually then the instructions to the nurses will actually specify the standard accepted times for medication dosing to patients at the hospital. So a 3 times a day schedule might be midnight, 8 a.m. And 4 p.m. And so they specify times in the hospital, but it's always based on this spacing of hours. So the physician could write QID and it would be every 6 hours and there would be times and they would be every 6 hours.
Okay.
So whatever is the standard. So here we have QID 4 times a day. This is what we tell our patients, take it 4 times a day. You get to pick when. Obviously you don't want them to take, all 4 of them at once and say, well, I took 4 of them one after the other, so it was 4 times. But the idea is to space it out. But, with people's sleep schedules, 4 times a day could be almost anything. Okay, so we have for the dosage form of suppositories, we might have per rectum. So that is insert into the rectum. Under the tongue is sublingual. We talked about sustained release alongside extended release and the other one just slipped out of my brain. Um, but
Oh, the extended release
long acting, yeah,
or long acting. I'm sorry.
extended release and long acting. Um, so that's something just to know these things. The problem with with many of these um, abbreviations is that some of them, well, a lot of them can have a couple of meanings. So you have to look at context. Okay.
Okay.
For one, um, we many hospitals have actually gone to refusing to telling people they cannot use abbreviations in medical records because it's too easy to make mistakes. One of the good examples of that is the abbreviation MS. Well, if we're talking about a disease, it's multiple
The
sclerosis.
sclerosis. Yep.
But if you're talking about a drug or something that a patient might receive, MS can be morphine sulfate or it can be magnesium sulfate, two very, very different entities.
Oh yeah.
So we want to be careful about looking at things, and if there's ever any confusion, clarify, right? Stat means now. Um, some people think stat means instantaneously. What that means in an emergency situation is instantaneously, yes. But in a hospital, I just talked about the fact that we have set times for giving medications to patients throughout the day. If a stat order is given for a medication, that means outside the normal rotation. You get
Yep.
the order, you go ahead and give it now. But if you have to wait 5 minutes because you're busy with a patient, that's no big deal. But that's really stat is often seen with giving loading doses, especially of antibiotics. You might see something that says a doctor giving a prescription, say take 2 capsules now, stat, and then 1 capsule per day for some period of time, which means
Okay.
that what they want you to do is take it right away. As soon as you pick it up from the pharmacy, take those first 2 right then, and then after that every day. Okay, we talked about suppositories. Here we have tablespoon and teaspoon. Another of my
Oh yes.
issues here: never use a single letter abbreviation because people are sloppy, and you really don't have a clue
What T can mean.
which T it is. And if the wrong one, you're either giving a third of the dose or 3 times the dose. So always write out the full TBSP or TSP. And I actually prefer, and you'll see this on things that you get from the pharmacy, pharmacists will never write TBSP. They will write tablespoonful.
Okay.
So that you have no doubt what they're saying.
Right.
Because it's too easy since there are 3 teaspoons to a tablespoon, it's too easy to get the wrong dose.
Yep.
TID, of course, is 3 times a day. And we use PV or VAG for vaginal drugs like some of the vaginal foams and candida treatments and so forth.
Okay.
As well as suppositories. Okay. So what you'll do, we won't be going through this right now. I just like to go through this and then we'll take a short break. So you'll do a few of these. So it's 10 after 7. Let's take a short break and then we'll come back and talk about some of these other abbreviations that we use in doing dose calculations.
Okay.
Great. So about 10 minutes-ish, all right?
Sounds great, Mike.
Ready to start?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's look at these. For purposes of dosage calculations, I don't know exactly how Chantal um, taught her classes, but for these purposes, we have a couple of abbreviation. Um, and DO, or just D, in terms of dosage calculations, means the dose ordered by the prescriber. So the prescription will come in, it'll say take 20 milligrams of atorvastatin, say. That's the dose ordered, 20 milligrams.
Okay.
Dose on hand and um, this either V or Q are related. Um, Q and V relate to the dosage form of the drug. I use only V in my calculations, and others people only use Q. Some people use both.
Okay.
What it boils down to is the physical form of the drug. In the case, it can be a capsule, and Q is not going to be milligrams or grams. This is a mistake. It's going to be a tablet, a capsule, a powder. It's going to be some form. Okay.
So
Or
like a non-liquid form then?
it would be if you're using, but it can be either one. It's just it has to. These two are pretty much interchangeable.
Okay.
V is something that is much more accessible as a volume. Okay, so it could be a number of milliliters, and if you just saw milliliter, you'd assume 1 milliliter. If it's a drug like often amoxicillin suspension, once it's prepared, has a concentration of 250 milligrams in 5 milliliters. So in that case, V would be 5 milliliters.
Okay.
So essentially, you read that off the stock bottle of the product. So there actually is no there is nothing that has to be done other than basically read the products for a lot of things. When we get into dosing by weight and other things, we'll talk about some times when it just gets a little more complicated, but not much. So frequency is just basically how often they'll take it. We use that as something that we will write onto instructions. So we will not worry about some of these measurements like apothecary. The avoirdupois is another system. It's very closely related to a mix of the household and the apothecary.
Okay.
And we have liquid units and solid units, solids, and I quibble with cream and ointment being included in solids. They're semi-solids, okay? But it can be a capsule or a tablet or anything that's taken in solid form. So other things that we will see is the dose will be given in grams or milligrams, never kilos. The kilo is the weight of the patient only.
Okay.
Or micrograms. And each drug will have its own dosing. Some drugs actually you have to take gram quantities. The penicillin derivative known as ticarcillin is often prescribed in 4-gram doses. So it's really huge.
Okay.
But those are rare. Most of the drugs you'll see are dosed in milligrams. Some common drugs you'll see dosed in micrograms are levothyroxine and digoxin, two of the most prescribed drugs in America. Levothyroxine is for thyroid disease. It's the most prescribed drug in the United States.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And digoxin is for congestive heart failure. It's also extensively prescribed, but those are both measured in micrograms. Sometimes you will see them in fractions of a milligram, like 0.25 milligrams. Well, 0.25 milligrams is 250 micrograms. Multiply that by 1,000, so, right? Okay.
Yep.
We've talked about milliliters, liters, teaspoons, tablespoons, etc. Fluid ounces, you won't be seeing those sorts of things in most practices and most settings where you're going to be a medical assistant. But you may be told you may have to advise a patient that they need to drink a quart of some fluid before they have their colonoscopy, for instance, because they have to do the clean out thing. And they drink large quantities of that awful junk.
Okay. Yeah. I heard that's not a fun process.
No, it's gotten better. It used to be you drank 2 gallons over 2 days.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was not pleasant.
Yeah, I heard the prepping part for it is the most unpleasant part out of the whole procedure.
Oh yeah, they put you to sleep. You go into la la land and then you say, well, when are you going to do it? Literally. But yeah, these are the only times you'll see large volumes like this being told to a patient.
Okay.
You won't see too many grains, pounds. We measure patients in pounds, convert them to kilos if we need to. And we talked about milliequivalents. So go ahead.
I do have a question regarding the pound abbreviation. Chantal had us use the LB or what is considered the pound sign, like the number sign. Is that still okay to use?
The number sign is usually reserved for prescriptions when a doctor is specifying a number of dosing units to be given to the patient.
Okay.
A lot of times these days, when you go and you're given a prescription for, say, Vicodin, what you'll see is they'll give you 6 or 8 tablets, and that's what they'll write on the prescription. The hashtag sign.
Yes.
8.
Okay.
I don't prefer using that for listing the weight of a patient. Okay.
Okay.
But that's my thing, and Chantal's not with us anymore, so there.
Nope. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's a good question, and for the most part, we don't like to do that.
Okay.
Again, it can be confused. Okay, so let's look at some equivalents. We're going to pretty much ignore apothecary. And this column on the left, as I'm looking at it, is metric, and the middle column is household. So there's 5 milliliters per teaspoon.
Yes.
And since there are 3 teaspoons per tablespoon, there are 15 in a tablespoon and 30 in an ounce. 2 tablespoons to an ounce. We all know that. And you can go up. Now this isn't exact. It's really 4.78 or something like that. But it's close enough. In medicine, if we can get within, when we have to dose in an inexact way, we're not using a syringe or something that is a very precise measurement. If we can get within 10% of the prescribed dose, we're fine. So the difference between 5 and 4.78 is 0.22, well within 10%. So this is good enough for medical purposes. Okay. So we can use that and sort of take it all the way through all of these measurements. If you use an online converter, and they're all over the place, you can just say, okay, how many milliliters are in a quart? And the answer that will come back to you is 946 and a fraction. Well, here we're essentially 14 less than 960. That's a minute amount. So it's well within, again, that 10%.
Okay.
So we're not terribly worried about the inaccuracies that come from these estimates. 2.2 pounds is pretty exact.
Right.
Okay. Now, here's a good reason we don't use the apothecary system. A grain, depending on the product, is either 65 milligrams or 60
Ooh.
milligrams.
Okay.
And that's, you know,
Big window.
65 to 60 is not quite 10%, but that's not good enough. Okay. So this is one of the reasons we don't like to do that. And there is no equivalent in the household.
Okay.
Okay. So, and in terms of weight, approximately 30 grams is an ounce, and it's something like 28.8. Okay.
Okay.
Now, note here, 30 milliliters is a fluid ounce. 30 grams is a weight ounce.
Okay.
It turns out that this 1 gram per milliliter is a very close approximation of, of the weight of a milliliter of water is a gram. And
Okay.
remember, a milliliter is also a cc, a cubic centimeter.
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, so pure water, technically pure water at 4 degrees centigrade, which is the temperature at which it is at its densest, weighs 1 gram per milliliter.
Oh, wow.
Other substances do not, you can't say that about other substances. You can't say that about mixtures of things in water because you've added weight and the volume can change a little. It can either be bigger or smaller. In fact, if you mix alcohol in water, the net volume of mixing alcohol in water is less than the separate volumes, the sum of the volumes separately. So this conversion of 1 gram per milliliter is really pertains to water, but again, other than very, very thick viscous things or very, very light things, for most water-based substances, this is fairly close. Okay, so we can say that a liter, if there are 1,000 milliliters in a liter, we can say that a liter weighs 1,000 grams or a kilogram. That's close enough, unless we're talking about something like mercury, which actually a liter of mercury weighs 13.6 kilograms.
Wow.
Which is closing in on 30 pounds. So this applies to water and dilute water solutions like normal saline or D5W. It's close enough approximation.
Okay.
But there's that. So in the metric system, we've got a gram, which is 1,000 milligrams. It's also 1,000,000 micrograms. Okay. A milligram is 1,000 micrograms. We go in steps. Now, there are steps every power of 10. So there is another 10 milligram step here, 0.01 grams is 10 milligrams. It has a special name, but we don't use them in medicine. The only place you'll see that is when you see blood chemistry results in milligrams per deciliter. A deciliter is 1/10 of a liter, so it's 100 milliliters.
Okay.
Okay. That's the one place in medicine that we actually see that. We don't measure microliters. You can. When I was functioning as a chemist, I had syringes that could measure microliters that I could use for some processes that I was working with.
Oh,
But
wow.
they're delicate and they're very, very thin, as you can imagine.
I'm
Um,
sure.
so, but we don't use that in medicine. The amounts are too small. Okay. So again, a liter is 1,000 milliliters. A deciliter is 100 milliliters, and they really should call that a DL,
Okay.
small DL.
Okay.
Capital D would be 10 liters, a deciliter.
Oh, wow.
So that's why we use a small d. It's one of the reasons that we also don't use a lot of the intermediates a lot in medicine, because again, we can confuse things. Okay? So you'll do some part of the calculations you'll be doing on the assignment will be related to these. So you'll have a chance. You can either print it out, or if you don't want to print it out because you don't have a printer or don't want to waste the paper and ink, which is perfectly understandable, just write the answers
Okay.
on a piece of paper, so you can, because you only have to transfer them to the quiz anyway. So calculations. The basis for medical calculations is the concept of ratio and proportion. A ratio is basically a way of showing a relationship between two measurements. Okay, it is basically another way to express a fraction.
Okay.
So when you see a ratio, you'll see 1:3. We read that 1:3.
3. Yeah. Okay.
Okay? So we can either write that as the fraction 1/3, or linearly using the divide symbol or the slash. Okay. And then we can convert that to a decimal by simply dividing the denominator into the numerator. Obviously, they got this wrong, so I corrected it. Excuse me. I'm going to take a short break. It's my daughter from Australia. I'll have her call back later.
Okay. So,
Hang on.
okay.
Hello. She's out taking a walk, and I'm teaching a class. So she'll be back soon. She was going to take a short walk. She'll call you when she comes back. Okay? Love you. Bye-bye. Okay. Sorry about that. She lives in Australia. So
That's so cool.
well, it is and it isn't. We have two daughters. The other one, who is now pregnant with our first grandchild, lives
Oh,
in Denmark,
congrats.
but she lives in Denmark.
Oh, wow.
So fortunately, we were able to go over there in February before all this COVID nonsense started. So, but we have no idea when we're going to get to see our granddaughter.
Oh, congratulations, though.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah,
That's
we'll be all right.
exciting.
It is. It is. So we're looking forward to that, but it'll be whenever. So anyway, let's go back to this. So we can convert ratios to fractions just by rewriting them,
Okay.
and then to decimals by doing, just
The division.
converting the fraction to a decimal. So you'll have a chance to do that.
Okay.
But and the real basis for calculations is the issue of proportionality. We know you use proportions all the time when you cook. If you double a recipe, you double all the ingredients, unless
Yep.
you're like me and you cut the salt in half. But you double the ingredients to make double the recipe. So that's a proportional increase.
Okay.
And everything increases by the same factor. So we can look at an equation here. Remember, an equation says that what's on the left is also on the right. No matter how it's expressed, they're equivalent. So If we look at 1/2 equals 6/12, we can convert that to the ratio form, which is 1:2, and this really ought to be a double colon here to make it a proportional equation, as 6:12, right?
Okay.
So if you go back to the fractional form and divide 2 into 1, you're going to get 0.5. If you divide 12 into 6, you're going to get 0.5. So this is a true proportion.
Okay.
You may be given problems on the assessment that ask you, is the following a true proportion? This is how you determine it. Convert it to fractional form, then convert it to the decimals. If the decimals are the same, it is a proportion. If not, it isn't.
Okay.
Okay.
That makes perfect sense.
And this, as I say, is the basis for our calculations. So you'll get a chance to look at that and make those decisions. Now, let's look at this dosing formula. Okay. This actually comes out of a rearrangement of a proportional equation, which is going to be expressed as if you have a dose that's prescribed, okay, and you have a drug on hand that is different. What you do is the dose prescribed is to the quantity of the drug given, and could be capsules, could be milliliters, right? Is equivalent to the dose on hand to the vehicle. If you rearrange that, you're going to get this equation right here. So the dose ordered divided by the dose on hand times the dosage form.
Or dosage form. Okay.
Yeah, the dosage form. This could be in milliliters, or it could be in as a solid form, like a capsule or a tablet. So in this example, the order was 500 milligrams. Well, that goes in DO, goes right up here on this part of the equation.
Yep.
So you look on the bottle and you've got 250 milligram capsules. So this is the dose on hand, and this is the vehicle, or Q, whatever you want to call it. So that DH goes here and Q becomes capsule. So we do that, set this up, 500 milligrams divided by 250 times 1 capsule. If it says 250 milligram per capsule, that's 250 milligrams in 1 capsule, right? So that's easy. 500 divided by 250 is 2. Milligrams have canceled out, 2 capsules. So that's what you're going to give the patient.
Okay.
If we're looking at a liquid drug, the difference here is only slight, okay? 50 milligrams of Narcan by mouth. What you have is a liquid form on hand. It has 100 milligrams in every milliliter. 100 milligrams per milliliter means 100 milligrams is DH, and Q, or V, is 1 milliliter.
Okay.
So we substitute that back into the same equation. 50 milligrams is DO, or D. 100 milligrams is DH, or H. You might see that formula. We multiply that by 1 milliliter. Again, the milligrams cancel out, and we end up with 1/2 milliliter as the dose, which we probably would give by an oral syringe.
Okay.
Okay. So that's how we would use these formulas. So there's several of them here for you to look at, and then there's some extra problems plus a couple of things. let's just take a look at some of these word problems. Word problems often have excess information. When we're looking at a prescription, there is no unneeded information for the full process of filling a prescription. However, for doing the math, we can leave out the name of the drug. We can even leave out the number of doses per day, because this calculation here of DO over DH times Q is the amount of drug to be given in each dose.
Okay.
Okay. So we don't even care ultimately about the frequency. Obviously, we care for patient instructions, but for the math, we don't care that it's gabapentin. We do care that it's being given orally, because that tells us what dosage form we need.
Right.
Right? So we do care about that. But after that, we don't care whether it's capsules or tablets, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have 100 milligram capsules on hand. So all you need to know is DH is 100 milligrams and Q or B is capsule. So when you look at these things, don't get caught up. If we go down here with this,
Oh my goodness, yes.
a 10 grain Tylenol suppository. Well, here is an example where Tylenol has never been measured in grains. So this is a made up problem. And we're going to assume that in this case, we're going to use the idea that each grain is 65 milligrams. Ugh. Well, we have a plague of moths here this year. Where do you live?
I live in the Greeley area.
Greeley, okay. Yeah, you probably have plenty of them too.
Oh yes, that and the June bugs are horrible.
No, we don't have those.
Oh,
Not yet.
flying around like crazy.
Yeah, I think it's maybe just a little cooler here, because we had those when we lived in North Carolina, and they made short work of our roses.
Oh, they're nasty little bugs.
They are.
I could do without them.
I bet. Okay, so this question requires you to think about this, and in fact, think about a grain being 65 milligrams. Because of course it's ordering 10 grains, but you've got these suppositories with 650 milligrams in them. Okay.
Okay.
So you need to when you're doing this, okay, so that's it. So as I said, there's 30 questions. That's probably the one that would be the most unusual in this group. So it's now 7:45. We've got an hour and a half till 9:15. What I'd like you to do, unless you have questions about this.
No, pretty self-explanatory.
Good. Let's go back here. We'll go back to the assignment, and then we'll back up to the week 1 in-class exercise. So this is a downloadable document. It's a Word document. It has space for you to put in answers. What I'd like you to do is, they're just basically a lot of stuff that we've just talked about. There's 10 questions. Go ahead and do that. Put your answers in there. If you want to put in some of the steps you used to solve it, that's fine. But if you just type in the answer, I'm happy with that. And then submit it to the submission box on this assignment.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead and work on that now for the next however long it takes.
Okay.
And what I will do is mute myself so that you don't hear some of the background noise here. I'll mute myself, and if you have any questions, just speak up because I'll be right nearby.
Okay, sounds good.
And I'll unmute and talk.
Okay,
Okay, great. Have fun.
thank you.
You're welcome. How's it going, Ariel?
Good. I am on the last problem.
Ah, excellent.
So I'm just answering, how many teaspoons of the suspension will you tell the patient to take per dose, and how many doses per day will she take?
Great.
Okay. I think that's correct. I will submit it now.
Super.
Pop in here. Oh, I'm under the assignment. Oh, I think it was to get that conversion information. Oh, I think class
Okay.
assignment.
Great.
Ah, why are you going so slow, computer? Have to love technology sometimes.
Indeed.
Has a mind of its own. All right.
It does.
Especially these days when everybody's on the internet and
Yeah, I've had trouble. I've related it to Zoom taking up way too much of the available computer memory and everything to the point where I've had to shut it down.
oh, I bet
So,
that hasn't been fun.
no, it hasn't. But if we do that, if I do that and restart it, things run a little bit better.
Okay.
So fortunately, I discovered this not at a time when I was in a class, and so it was easy to handle.
Oh, that's nice.
It was. So
Well, I have submitted that assignment.
excellent.
Donna thinks Buddy is dying. So it's slipping away little by little. And I think, of course,
Okay.
describing it like that for
So
some months.
I'll get that graded in the next couple of days. And what I generally like to do is post the answer sheet if there's any mistakes on yours.
Okay.
Or if you've actually asked for help on a question. But if everything is fine, I probably won't bother.
Okay.
I'll just let you know that it was that it was all fine.
Perfect.
So that we'll have a chance to follow up on that. So what I suggest, we've got another 45-ish minutes. There's a couple of things that that I would suggest that you get started on. One is you can start looking at one or the other of the discussions, or you can start looking at the assignment.
Okay.
And do that for the rest of the class period. And again, I'll be here to answer questions.
Okay,
All right,
Sounds good.
great. Then I will mute. And then if you need anything, just speak up.
sounds good.
It's time to close this out for the night, Ariel.
Okay.
If we go back to take a quick look at modules, what I have done is I have uploaded a number of documents into this page, resources from instructor,
Okay.
including my corrected copy of the assignment. So you'll have some of my thoughts on that. So just make sure you get the discussions and assessment done. And you've been working on your daily checkpoints, so that's great. So you're caught up there.
Okay.
So, and I'll see you on Monday.
Sounds great, Mike.
Okay. Have a good weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you have any questions, you can email me. So,
Sounds great.
okay.